After our interview of David Eggins and Denise Knowles about DAPPs, I thought it would be very interesting to return to the CAFCASS website and to go through some of the pages to see how they talk about DAPPs and what their descriptions are and what their expectations are.
If I could just butt in, just to remind you that David Eggins and Denise were really telling us that the DAPPs don't work. Not the ones that CAFCASS approve of, anyway.
That's right.
So here is CAFCASS's view of their own domestic abuse perpetrator programmes.
So we've gone to the CAFCASS website, as I said, and we've got to the Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Programme.
I'm going to be finding the website pages, so here we are.
Yeah. So they describe it as follows. The DAPP aims to help people who have been abusive towards their partners or ex-partners to change their behaviour and develop respectful, non-abusive relationships. Taking part in DAPP can make a real difference to the lives of those involved, including children who have been affected, but it can be challenging and the court will make decisions about contact based on the progress a participant makes during the programme. In most cases, CAFCASS will assess a person's suitability for the programme and will check whether it is available locally. We will only make a referral following a court order. They carry on what to expect. The DAPP takes place in groups involving 8 to 12 participants. Sessions are weekly outside working time and last for between 2 and 2.5 hours over about 6 months. Every DAPP has a parallel service that supports partners and ex-partners at risk from domestic abuse, and this service is offered to them. The family court advisor will make the referral to the provider. That's the person, of course, who's in the court proceedings, speaking for the child. The provider delivers the DAPP sessions and will report back to CAFCASS on progress and learning. The court is then informed by CAFCASS regarding changes in risk. They say there's no charge for CAFCASS service users to take part in a DAPP when this is ordered by the court. And then they say that there's a place where you can find local providers, which we'll look at shortly. But before that, I wanted to go on to the document which is described as Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Program, but it goes into more detail. The top part is already what's written in the previous web page. So I think I'll go down to the bit which talks about a DAPP might be appropriate when. So when there is a pattern of acknowledged or proven domestic abuse, you are able to accept responsibility for the abuse in your relationships and show a willingness to want to change the way you behave. The level of risk is not too high and is such that upon successful completion of the course, safe and beneficial contact with your children is a realistic aim. You are ready and able to work with a group. As a CAFCASS service user, your suitability to take part in a DAPP will be assessed by CAFCASS and the DAPP provider and must be ordered by the court. They carry on the course. There is usually some introductory work to prepare for the group sessions. The group programme will help you to change your behaviour and make decisions without resorting to violence or abuse. Groups are often arranged in modules on particular themes and will help you too. Learn about the effects and consequences of domestic abuse on your partner and family. Participate in group sessions with other individuals who have behaved in a similar way. Talk openly about your behaviour and the people affected by it. Identify the beliefs and attitudes which underpin violence and abuse. Cope with your behaviour and feelings in difficult situations. Learn how to react without being abusive. Learn about respect and responsible parenting. Learn to understand and want to change your behaviour. So that sounds very laudable, really, all of it, doesn't it?
Well, it's lovely. If only it worked.
That's right. They're talking about feedback, and then they repeat again about you have to be allowed to go on a course. So there has to be an agreement that you go on a course and the court then has to order it. So the next thing that we look at is the directory of providers. This is simply to show you that if you were getting involved in one, you can see that there are lots of areas there. You can pick your local area as you scroll down the page, and you will find some of these will have DAPP providers. So they're all over the country. But what we have to remember with these particular DAPPs is that they all have to have been approved by CAFCASS, which means that they have to have been accredited by an organisation called Respect.
So let's look at Respect.
Yes. So the next thing is, we've come to the Respect website, and they say, only services who have completed the full accreditation process can describe themselves as Respect accredited. The accreditation process is divided into 2 stages. Completing both stage 1 and stage 2 is required to be considered a full accreditation, and it is required every 3 years. If you wish to check whether a service is Respect accredited, please contact info@respect.uk.net. And what we heard in the interview that we did with David and Denise was that they weren't operating a Respect accredited programme, and that they wouldn't want to because their programme was looking at the issue of domestic violence and domestic abuse in a different way.
Well, accreditation with Respect requires you to tick some very specific boxes. You have to follow this so-called Duluth confrontational model. You have to accept, or your programme has to promote the ideology that male domestic violence is prompted by the patriarchal attitudes of men towards women. It has to last 6 months.
And sometimes more, they were saying.
And sometimes more.
Yeah.
It has to have the kind of rather accusatory, punishing attitudes that Duluth model introduced, and it has to follow a certain pattern in the course of each session in which there's reporting back from each member of the group, which takes up at least half the session, followed by a certain amount of teaching that goes on. And
they went on, David and Denise went on to describe their own programme, which if you look at Temper Domestic Abuse, I'd listen to the interview because it's really very interesting.
Temper Domestic Violence, isn't it?
Yes, it's one or other, sorry. And listen to what they say about how they conduct these programmes, and I think you would discover and realise that they are much more therapeutic. They're willing to get very much alongside people in these groups rather than standing in front of them. They were criticising for the CAFCASS approved processes to be them and us, the trainers,
versus
the good
participants.
people. Yes, the participants, the bad people.
So,
and they get alongside people and actually they can see change as the course goes on, they say.
So CAFCASS is commissioning Respect to accredit the courses that court-mandated domestic abuse perpetrators are permitted to attend or would be approved of to attend. CAFCASS's principles seem to be very lovely and constructive, but the Respect approach is extremely narrow and prescriptive, not allowing for variation, and certainly not allowing for what might be regarded as reasonable therapeutic approach.
So I then moved on to another page in the Respect website, which is their Respect Standard, 3rd edition 2017, and I'm just looking at one particular. It's page 1 under the MP's introduction, Sarah Newton's introduction. It's safe, effective, accountable work with perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse. That's how it's described. This 3rd edition of the Respect Standard is applicable to any organisation working with perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse. This document sets out what is required in terms of a model of work, management and operation of these services. To achieve accreditation, evidence will be sought to demonstrate that an organisation meets these requirements. Providing a service to those who inflict violence and abuse on those they are close to brings with it a considerable responsibility. to ensure that this work is safe and effective and that it does not inadvertently contribute to the harm already experienced by survivors. The Respect standard is focused on ensuring that the organisations meet the responsibility and...
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
This idea that you might not inflict further harm on the people who are already victims brings us back to this idea that some perpetrators shouldn't be recommended to go on a DAPP course because the hope of change might persuade the wife, the female, the woman who's the victim, not to leave the perpetrator. Let's just unpack that a moment. Mm-hmm. In other words, the inadvertent harmed victims in this case would be the idea that because your partner's going on the domestic abuse course, you might decide not to leave him. So you wouldn't send the man on the course because they kind of want you to leave him.
And you're saying him because these are the courses which are only for him.
They're only for men.
Yes.
So the inadvertent harm here might be, or would be, that a woman decides to stay with her partner because she thinks the DAPP course might work, and therefore he'll become a partner where they can stay together. And in fact, Respect would not recommend a course if they thought that the woman should leave. It's an amazing bit of reasoning. Anyway, on we go.
Mm-hmm. The Respect standard is focused on ensuring that organisations meet this responsibility, and in line with Article 16 of the Istanbul Convention, it places the experience of survivors and their safety, well-being and freedom at the centre of all work with perpetrators. The Respect standard includes a set of 10 principles which should underpin all work with perpetrators and standards across 5 areas of service provision: management of the organisation, intervention delivery, diversity and access, multi-agency working and innovation.
When we talk about diversity, of course, we're not talking about women, although there's plenty of evidence that there are female domestic abusers. Diversity does not include half the population.
The Respect standard should be read alongside 2 companion documents, the Respect Outcomes Framework and Respect Guidance for Effective Targeting of Interventions. Where interventions with perpetrators are delivered in a professional and competent manner, they have proved effective in creating change and reducing harm. They have proved effective, they say. However, poorly run services can raise the risk and add to survivor vulnerability. Therefore, no organisation should provide perpetrator services without full regard of these nationally agreed principles and standards and without sufficient resources to ensure compliance.
In other words, we need to keep our monopoly on this process of approving courses.
Yes. So that's the standard. And then the final thing that I wanted to look at was something that we've done an interview with Rick Bradford. Some of you may know him as William Collins. We'll be publishing that soon, but he very kindly sent me this from The Empathy Gap, his book. And he has sent me a quote, which is in another book written by Shepherd and Pence in 1999.
Just who are they?
These are the people who were at the vanguard of this Duluth project in America.
So the creators of the Duluth project.
Yeah, they're part of the group who set it up.
On which the current DAPP programme is based.
Yes.
Right.
Coordinating Community Responses to Domestic Violence, it's called. Lessons from Duluth and Beyond by Melanie Shepherd and Ellen Pence. And Rick referred me to something that Ellen Pence had said in this book. The power and control wheel, that's something that is part of the Duluth programme. If you were to Google that, you'd actually see the wheel come up and you'd be able to see what it contains. The power and control wheel, which was developed by battered women attending women's groups, was originally a description of typical behaviours accompanying the violence. In effect, it said, when he is violent, he gets power and he gets control. Somewhere early in our organising efforts, however, we changed the message to, he is violent in order to get control or power. The difference is not semantic, it is ideological. Somewhere we shifted from understanding the violence as rooted in a sense of entitlements to rooted in a desire for power. By determining that the need or desire for power was the motivating force behind battering, we created a conceptual framework that in fact did not fit the lived experience of many of the men and women we were working with. Like those we were criticising, we reduced our analysis to a psychological, universal truism.
Except it's not true. So they use the word truism, but it's actually not true.
The Domestic Abuse Intervention Programme staff, like the therapist insisting it was an anger control problem, or the judge wanting to see it as an alcohol problem, or the defence attorney arguing that it was a defective wife problem, remained undaunted by the difference in our theory and the actual experiences of those we were working with. We were all engaged in ideological practices and claimed them to be neutral observations. It was the cases themselves that created the chink in each of our theoretical suits of armour. Speaking for myself, I found that many of the men I interviewed did not seem to articulate a desire for power over their partner, although I relentlessly took every opportunity to point out to men in the groups that were so motivated and merely in denial. The fact that few men ever articulated such a desire went unnoticed by me and many of my co-workers. Eventually we realised that we were finding what we had already predetermined to find. The staff were interpreting what men seemed to expect or feel entitled to as a desire. When we had to start explaining women's violence towards their partners, lesbian violence, and the violence of men who did not like what they were doing, we were brought back to our original undeveloped thinking that the violence is rooted in how social relationships, e.g. marriage, and the rights people feel entitled to within them are socially, not privately, constructed. So, that's interesting, isn't it?
So these are the people who designed the DAPP programs that are being promoted by CAFCASS and approved
and
of
still
by
being used.
Respect. These
Still
are the people
being
saying
used.
that it's based on the wrong
Yes.
ideology.
This book was written in 1999, so
They've had time to learn, haven't
21 years later,
Mm-hmm.
we're still using this program, which one of the authors of has already described it as, well, wrong. Is the only word you can use for it, isn't it?
Well, I think the philosophy that they switched to mistakenly, and which they're now recognising was, or then even back in 1999 recognising was a mistake, was the idea that male domestic violence towards women is based on the idea that men are entitled to batter women, and it is simply an expression of the power that men feel over women. That it's not related to individual experiences or individual circumstances or difficulties that the man might have or difficulties the woman might have. It is based on a patriarchal society. This is an astonishing generalisation to make, and they quite rightly withdraw it.
Yes.
But Respect hasn't withdrawn it. Respect is still promoting this idea as if it was fresh today.
Yes. It's unbelievable,
So have you run
really.
out of words?
Yes, I think I
Okay.
have.
Let's leave it at that.